Jeff and Jennifer, how did you come to write the book and why together?
Yeah, we wrote the book in part because both of us saw that there are just so many resources on the planet, not just financial resources, but people's time, creativity, networks, passion, ideas that are often stay inactive. And they stay inactive in part because of obstacles we put up around them. And, there are lots of obstacles, our fear of rejection, our, issues around money, but also one of the clear barriers that happens often between kind of fundraiser and philanthropist is this perceived power dynamic. And that's the philanthropist has all the power, and the person who's looking for resources to be mobilized in support of our work is the supplicant. And so that sets up a dynamic that really limits our ability to get all the work done we want to get done in the world, and also our ability to really mobilize resources.
Like our story of how we came together, I mean, it's using our networks to really do something beyond what each of us could do by ourselves. And when we started using the networks to work on things that were important to us, that we're passionate about, people started saying, you guys really ought to talk to each other. And one of our good friends, Ray Chambers, who's a wonderful philanthropist, said, gee, Jennifer, you and Jeff should talk. And we started having this relationship that was a walls down, I call it, no really difference between who she was and who I am. And so it's the fundraiser and the philanthropist contrast, but also comparisons and understanding what we have that are the same goals and objectives. So we started working on some things together, whether it's in the music space. We did something in bringing music back to kids K through 12. We did something in Africa, and all of a sudden became part of a team. And when I was teaching at Harvard, it was a natural thing to bring Jennifer up, and they heard her and said, you have to set up a course. And so a course became, the focus of our time and attention, particularly Jennifer's at Harvard. And then another friend of ours, Deepak Chopra, helped us connect into a book publisher saying, bring this out to the rest of the world. And so we leveraged off of that. So the network continues to grow, it continues to build off of each other.
That's wonderful, and we would hope that we're in some indirect way part of your network too, because we're reaching 200 people who are kind of working in this and using you as role models. What do you think is the biggest payoff somebody could or should get from the book?
I think there's a couple of payoffs. One, obviously, more resources are getting mobilized in support of the work, again. I also think fundraising is perceived as such an incredible place of pain for so many people. And an instant payoff is to reframe the entire practice away from fundraising, away from something that's just, something to endure for the sake of the mission, to really being integral to the mission, because it is. And I think also it's, the other payoff, certainly it's about the philanthropist journey. And we talk so much about that in this process of someone who is getting more and more involved in a cause and more passionate and putting money and their own time against it, that's wonderful. But I also think we miss that it's also about the fundraiser's journey, or the executive director, or whomever else is day to day getting up and thinking about this work. Because I think we miss that piece when we're saying it's just about the philanthropist journey. It's about all of our journeys. What are we all bringing to the equation, and how are we all changing as a result of it, going deeper, connecting more strongly, and getting more done in the world.
Yeah, it's really allowing people to find ways to connect and to work together for something higher than themselves. And if that's boards of directors of nonprofits that all of a sudden start being treated like individuals as opposed to a board, if that's management teams of nonprofits working more smoothly with boards, then I think we're really happy. Is understanding how to really change the dynamic from one that's fear-based many times, where the fundraiser themselves are afraid of not getting funding or not getting what they need, or is the pitch perfectly perfect or direct, to the fear of the donor themselves saying, am I just being used for money? Am I just being, am I going to have to be afraid of failing, of really not being with my peers and working together what's their intent? And so there's a lot of fear in all of this normal donor fundraiser relationship. And if we can lower those walls and make it more joy, then I think we're going to be successful.
And, Phil, I would just also add that, one of the biggest challenges is that we far, far too often infuse money with the values of power and fear and scarcity and control. And I think if we just shift our perception about money being that could be a currency for justice, for commitment, for joy, and for love, I think if we can just infuse those values into money, it becomes a currency that's much lighter than we often think of it. And that's absolutely central to this whole equation, because money then just becomes the gas that goes in the car. It's not the car, it's not the driver, it's not the destination. It's just a tool to get the work done. And so it gets out of the center of the relationship, which is often what causes all these crazy power dynamics that limit the ability to get our work done.
Who do you think would be receptive to it? What kind of audience can rise to this?
We started out thinking about nonprofits, and particularly in my own mind, thought about the relationship between a nonprofit CEO and their chairperson. And if that's a healthy relationship where they can work together as partners, then you're much more likely to have an effective nonprofit. So we targeted at that focus group, and then said, gee, would it ripple out to other boards of nonprofits, the management teams? I mean, we started thinking about it, this is not just for fundraisers, because really, honestly, everybody involved, the team, is there to get resources, knowledge, network, contacts, relationships. And funnily enough, as we continue to talk about the Generosity Network, we have people coming in. I have a friend of mine who's a congressman, Tim Ryan, who said, I read the book, and this applies exactly to everything I do, trying to connect and build relationships in my own constituents. And I'm going to use this. I'm not going to have any of these big galas anymore. And then we had another guy come in and say, this applies to real estate brokers and how they develop in their local communities networks of good and action so that they deepen their relationships so that, one, they'll get more business, but two, they'll have better lives.
And I love the fact that you said with Congressman Ryan, Jeff, that it's, about building his constituency. And, something we talk about in the book and certainly practice is the word client comes from the Latin word clientum, which means to lean against. And, typically in a contract, you kind of negotiate all the terms of the contract up front, and then you work very hard to fulfill them. Jeff and I and the members of the Generosity Network really think of it much more as a consortium. And the word consortium comes from the Latin word constare, which means to stand together. And you don't negotiate all the terms up front. You initiate a learning journey, a journey of how you're going to work together, how you're going to start to weave other people into it. How's it never going to end in a certain way? Because even if the specific project you're working on together concludes, what's next? Presumably you're going deeper and deeper and learning more and more and growing. And so I think this appeals to people who are much more interested in creating a consortium than necessarily a client base.
One of the things I got out of the book was the power of story as opposed to fact and logic and planning, but the power of story, and you've used the word journey a lot. Can you tell us more about your view of the power of story?
In the book, we work closely with Marshall Ganz. And Marshall Ganz is the great famed community organizer who worked in the 60s in the civil rights movement, and then for many years for Cesar Chavez, organizing the farm workers movement, and is now a longtime faculty member at Harvard, one of the most popular faculty members. And Marshall teaches in my class and has become a very close collaborator of ours. And he says the way to build community is first and foremost through the power of story, because it's how we connect. It's the connective tissue that weaves us all together. And he has a specific formula he uses, which is to just really think about why am I called to do this work? What is it for me that really makes this work important? Which is something I think we miss day to day, because we get so focused on the bottom line. We don't necessarily think, every day I'm called to do this work because I'm moved to save the environment or protect children or impact global health or whatever it is. I think that's really important. And then after you've really identified that, and of course, again, that continues to grow and deepen as you get deeper into the work, it's why are we called to do this? You know, we exist in relationship to each other. This is certainly the premise of the Generosity Network, that we can't do it alone. You know, the old Frank Sinatra song, "I Did It My Way," is just, it's a myth. We've got to do this together. And you know, why are we as a collective community called to do this? Why does this matter now? And that's the last piece, is the now question. And the now question is really about the question of urgency. And certainly not urgency as in the world's coming to an end, because that's a fear-based response that really actually limits people's ability to get moving. But it's why now? What difference is it going to make? How's the world going to look different if we start mobilizing in a really meaningful way today? And so that's really the framework we use. And, you know, Marshall, again, teaches it in my class. And we spend a lot of time with these leaders, helping them identify their own story, their collective story, and why does it matter right now?
You know, it's getting each person, you know, that you're involved in a collaboration to tell their story. And most people don't know the other person's reason that they're passionate about a particular cause or a team that they like to work with. And so if you can get the stories to start coming, there's a real lot of openings and a lot of opportunities to connect. You know, for example, when I tell my story, where, you know, in 7th grade, I walk in the band room and the band director gives me a tuba to play, and I start learning about music and understanding and feeling what it's like to play music with others, to create something beyond anything I could do by myself, that's for sure. And that feeling, that energy, and that present moment state, I like to do that again and again and again. And it drove me through my life, not only for a love of music, but a love of connecting and working with others in teams. And so it drove me through at JP Morgan. And, you know, so all these tools apply in the business world, you know, as much as they do in the social organizing, community organizing worlds. You know, how do you connect these teams together? How do you reinforce these networks? And so when you look, and when I look to, whether it's in the private equity business, which I was in, or whether it's now in the social enterprise world or nonprofit world, building these teams, building a little jazz band of your own, where you understand each person has their own unique sound, their own unique skills, instruments to play, and bringing them together to create something that's innovative, that you didn't think would come, you know, until you start hearing the sounds. People having managed egos so that they're working well together as the team, and then understanding that there's an audience, that there's somebody you're performing for, you know, with, that you want to connect to. And so that drives me in all of the different nonprofits I work with, or the different boards I work on, or the philanthropists I work in partnership with.
Thank you so much for doing that, Jeff. You know, I could read your bio and I would never get that sense of what motivates you and who you are doing it. It was, you know, the jazz analogy was fabulous. Thanks. Jennifer, would you be willing to tell your story?
Yeah, I started as a fundraiser 25 years ago, and I worked for my little liberal arts college and absolutely believed in liberal arts and wanted to share it with the world in some ways. And just, you know, was very fortunate because I had a college president who said to me, just go out and make 300 face-to-face visits this year. You absolutely cannot raise money sitting behind a desk. And so, you know, 21 years old. Oh, and by the way, he said, you're covering New York City. And I grew up in Pittsburgh and really had never been out of that sort of part of the Western Pennsylvania. And so I just sort of fearlessly threw myself in. We were raising money for a science building. You know, it was the late 80s. So I always say I had the like big shoulder pads and the, you know, the frizzy perm and the big briefcase walking around. And I'd pull out the blueprints and would talk, you know, meeting with alumni and parents and saying, you know, your name goes here. This is what we're doing. And I would just go in and pitch. And I was having absolutely no luck. And I hated my job. And I remember about halfway through the year, and I really do remember this moment so clearly because I was walking up Fifth Avenue and I was going back to my little hotel room and I thought, I have to get a new job. And I was a philosophy major, so I didn't quite know what I was going to do with that, but I knew fundraising was not it. And then, that night I was sitting in my hotel room and I was really thinking to myself, something doesn't add up. Because I know that the people that, with whom I'm meeting and who I'm talking to and I'm learning their stories and everything else want to make a difference in the world. They care about science, they care about the leaders of tomorrow, they care about education. And I know that I have the exact same passion. And I'm going in and asking them, without really understanding who they are, just to invest. So it was much more of a pitch. And so my epiphany was really, how do I go in and really just talk human being to human being right from the first meeting and get rid of the sales techniques and just start talking for real. And it's shifted. I've, again, been in the business for 25 years. I've, worked on multi-billion-dollar capital campaigns, and fundraising is an absolute place of joy because it's needed to get, everything done that we need and want to get done in our world.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's fascinating to me how often the liberal arts come into this conversation as you get, Charlie Collier at Harvard, and now we've got music, we've got philosophy, It is fascinating. The skills you're using are really the skills of the humanities.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
I guess maybe that's a segue into the Jeffersonian dinner concept. How does a Jeffersonian dinner work, and what kind of skills would a person need to bring that off?
The dinner itself is a connector. It's a way to open relationships with others. I was at Monticello. I was chairman of Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home, and we used to have these amazing dinners and by candlelight, and everyone would sit and feel the energy of Mr. Jefferson because Mr. Jefferson had amazing people at the table, and he really wanted to hear what everybody else had to say, and so everyone listened. And so why not have that same format in everyday dinners that we have today? And the frustration in my own heart of going to 1,000-person galas and fundraisers and not connecting, being there because somebody asked me, I talked to the person next to them about their kids or their dog, we hear somebody speak and perform, and then you go home. And what a wasted 2.5 hours. Or a cocktail party where you have 50 people and somebody does a speech and then everybody else goes home. And where's the connection there? So said, let's take that dinner, 12 to 15 people, and let's get people to open up and have a whole table conversation. The mind is better if they're with other minds talking in common thought and common issues. And so then to the point we talked about before on the public narrative, let's mix a little bit of Marshall Ganz's thought of the public narrative, this me, we, and now, strategy, and use it in the dinner. So let's have an opening question that allows people to connect. And so with Wendy Kopp, we did a dinner on educational innovation, and opening question was, who's your favorite teacher of all time? And halfway around the table, people were crying because they're understanding what, from the heart, people believe is a good teacher. And then we carried on the conversation after 2 minutes each as to what do we believe the issues are around keeping great teachers and what the things that we can do to help. And then, so that's the we, and then the now, toward the end, you say, what's happening? What's going to happen from here? What are you going to do? What do you want to know about? Is there somebody at the table that you connected with and you want to follow up with? And so it's an opening set of relationships that then continue on past the dinner. And so I do this on my own vacations with my family and other families, and my 14-year-old comes up with amazing topics and questions. And I just have a hard time going back to the 1,000-person dinners. But the Jeffersonian dinner seems to be a theme. We've done hundreds and hundreds of these. We have a challenge in the next 3 months to do 100 of them by the end of December. And it's happening. Lots of people are doing them. It's a great way to raise funds because there's no pitches. It's just figuring out relationships. And it's a great way to find others who are passionate about your causes. And trust me, after every dinner, over half the people would love to host the dinner, the next dinner, because they have such a great time.
Yeah, and I would just add to your point, your point about stories and liberal arts, Phil, that opening question, it's so critical that it's evoking people to tell their story, not share an idea. And so the dinners that I've seen that aren't as successful is when the question is maybe, talk about an innovation in your life that made a difference, because then people are saying the iPad. It's not really getting to the heart of who we are as people and how similar we are, and how when we break down those barriers, it doesn't matter. And by the way, we send bios out in advance, and so people actually know what people do in general, and that's fine, because we do want to know that. But then we also want to know who each other is and why we come to the table and what values do we share. And so I think that's a really key part of that opening question. And then after that, diving deeper into, what are the potential issues that we're looking to solve for here, and how might we as a group come together to do that. And I also find that very powerful, because when 10 people come together, 10 to 12 people come together and, in any scenario, in any time, in any place, and say we're going to make up our minds collectively to make a difference, things happen. And so there's a sense of solidarity that gets built in these dinners they're palpable. You can absolutely feel them. And that's a key part, that's a node in the generosity network that is very powerful. And it just breaks down walls so quickly.
You can do this anywhere, anytime. Host it. It's not that hard, but there is some fear. Some people say, I've never used this format. Can I really tell people that I'm inviting to dinner that they're not allowed to talk to the person next to them? They have to talk to the whole table. Bottom line is, people love that. I mean, I've had people come in and say, I could never really hear what was going on at the table. This is great. Or, I really was frustrated because the person across the table I really wanted to get to know, I never did, And so all of a sudden this opens up. And what it takes also is some light moderation. So somebody there who will listen and make sure that voices are heard around the table, that there's no dominant personalities. And again, there's no pitches. You may have subject experts. You may have somebody who has a nonprofit that's really amazing, and you talk to them about how are you relating to building strength for new teachers and keeping them in class, and great examples and stories. But you're not there to raise money. You're really there just to start opening relationships.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Hearing you both address that question about the Jeffersonian dinners, I was thinking about the book and the part in there about Otto Scharmer's 4 levels of listening, and the highest being generative. Do you see a connection between the kind of thing that's happening that you're describing, the Jeffersonian dinner, in that kind of generative listening?
Yeah, I do, absolutely, because it almost, you can just feel, you really can, you can kind of feel that invisible web of connection being built. When you feel it whenever you're in a room, and just everybody, like as Jeff said, walls come down, and it is palpable, as I said before, and that's what generative listening is. It's not about, who I am on paper, but it's about who we all are together. And that, maybe not in the first few minutes. And again, I think that's where the moderation becomes powerful. But you can feel as people are going around, and you're seeing where we all share, it becomes just naturally generative listening, which many people don't practice ever. And so it's a great venue to do that.
I think I'm getting a better sense of the answer to the next question from hearing you talk about it, but can you define a generosity network?
In my experience, it's each person has their own generosity network, and those that open up and connect, and it will change over time depending on the things you're working on. Who I work on ideas in the music space with kids is different than how I might work on with global health or working on animals or whatever might be the passions of the day. But building those networks so that you can move in and out is like a great jazz band, moving out, an instrument you need or for this song or let somebody perform, in a more strong way is what building your own network's about. And you can do that, from your local food bank and figuring out the network of people who are also interested in the same issues to larger issues within the state or city or international issues as well. So finding where your passions connect and finding others that are connected to it and building this network where it's like the old parable of stone soup where, you come together and the soldiers in the stone soup story, brought a pot and some water and a stone, and some people I said, what are you doing? He says, oh, we have a tasty broth and, if we only had a carrot. And so somebody said, well, I have a carrot, and then all of a sudden says, well, somebody else says I have an onion. And so eventually you have an amazing soup that comes together. And that generosity network, the soup's different every time. for every individual. But building those networks is one that gives me a more meaningful life, and I think most other people do as well.
I think the jazz metaphor is such a good one for what a generosity network is, because in a jazz band, everybody's playing their own instrument, but they're playing it in a way that, when you're, again, dropping walls, when you're really moving into the music, just greater and greater heights are reached, and it's not prescribed in a lot of ways. It's improvisational, and so you allow yourself to take risks that you might not otherwise take if you're just playing the notes on a piece of paper. And so I love the jazz band metaphor. Jeff and I worked for many years with Quincy Jones and have a great fondness for jazz, but it really does embody kind of what a generosity network is, because at the end of the day, you are achieving something great, potentially. And if you're not, you're learning. And I think it's really what we're striving to invite people to do.
Thinking about your range of reference and the people you talk about, in passing, I'm reminded of a couple of things. Well, at one point in the book, Jennifer, you talk about being in a essentially a drawing room in London and asking, do I really fit in here? There's some pretty important people in the room. Do I really fit in? And at the other extreme, you've got Marshall Gans working with Cesar Chavez. And I guess the question is, does this scale down from Quincy Jones and Harvard and the luminaries who obviously want to be in a room with each other, because there's a lot there in that room when they're together. But does it scale down to like Salvation Army in Tuscaloosa? I mean, can the ordinary fundraiser connect to what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, just to clarify, in that London drawing room, my point was that it can be overwhelming, but when you really realize, again, we're just human being to human being connecting to each other regardless of our title, you can actually pretty fearlessly go into conversation with people. And it absolutely translates down, because again, it's not a question of who we are on paper. It's a question of what can we bring to this equation that is really going to make a difference. And that translates everywhere, I think. And of course, the same power dynamic, is at work, I think, regardless of, who it is, if money's at the center of a relationship. A husband and wife can have massive power dynamics because of money being in the center of a relationship. An employer and employee, certainly, philanthropist, nonprofit executive. And so that's really the question. What's at the center of the relationship? And if you're keeping the work and the relationship itself at the center of it, it translates everywhere to everyone, because it's the same exact, equation of two human beings and then more and more human beings coming together to get something profound done.
There's one guy who came to us and said, I re-looked at the way my church works on its clothing drive. And he said, I got 12 people together, and we had a real open discussion about how we're going to make this better and more effective. So rather than me trying to run the clothing drive and trying to beg, borrow, and steal from people, he said all of a sudden became a collaboration. We worked together. And he said it was the most effective clothing drive we had, in years. Or whether it's, the individuals, we have another great friend who's working to reduce the number of pets that are killed in animal shelters. And she is working, in Jacksonville, Florida, and they brought it down to almost zero because of the collaboration that they helped put together of people in the local markets. And it's what we do and look at, working, any kind of 14, in Jacksonville, Florida, 12 to 14 and they brought it down, come together for a joint cause, whether it's Boy Scouts, whether it's the church, or whether it's, working in your local town to come up with some common objectives for your public schools. It all works.
By the way, just say that in my workshops, certainly like on, I do, I'll take phone calls with people. I've consulted with so many PTAs and churches and, all of that over the years. And it's the same thing. It's just reframing this whole practice. So, yes, I would just agree with what Jeff just said.
Humanity scales. It's good to know.
and head and heart coming together. I mean, that's what it's all about, right?
Yes.
I would say, I think people sometimes, in terms of the humanity scales, I love that, but I think people often think of hard as being kind of a soft thing, and we've got issues we have to deal with. We've got impact we have to make, and we need to make sure the numbers are right. And the way I certainly see the heart is an instrument of vision, and it's a very different instrument of vision than the head in some ways, because it can tolerate more risk and uncertainty, and it can try new things, and it can see that the life is an unfinished opus. So I'd love it if tomorrow we wake up and all the poverty is eradicated from the planet, but it's not likely, because as human beings, there's always duality. And so I think really operating from the place of the heart as an instrument of vision allows you to just continue to get up every day and continuing the work in a way that doesn't lead you astray or frustrate you or burn you out, which is what happens very often.
Thank you. Are there concluding thoughts or anything you'd like to add that I haven't asked?
There's a group I'm associated with that is 40 families that have decided to get together to help fund scale social enterprises. And there's a group of them, 4 families, that have gotten together to say, I want to focus on learning disabilities. So social enterprises and others that are focused in that area, and those individual families could not have afforded to get together to fund the interventions and the enterprises that they want to do, and they could not add the value that they could have together. And so understanding how these collaboratives come together, how you connect these philanthropically oriented families to work together. And what I found is another tool, which is a small group of people, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, it doesn't really matter, who are collaborative glue, who hold people together. And so what we find is those 4 families are very happy to pay for somebody who's going to make sure that between the meetings, they work together. Between the meetings, they share information. They share knowledge, and then they identify things they can work on together. They lobby together, and they love talking about these passions. And so what I had been feeling in the past, and some people going into the nonprofit space, said, we're going to show people the best nonprofits to fund, the best analytically oriented, good return on investment, impact oriented, but it lost the heart. And so these are not just investments. These are great opportunities to lower suffering in the world, to have an impact on the big causes of the day, but also to get passionately connected, to throw in all of your resources that you have, your knowledge and your network with other people, rather than just waiting on trying to evaluate the returns and have more of a cold relationship. So it's bringing heart back, it's bringing knowledge back, it's bringing community back to a lot of causes that we think it's the only way you're going to solve them.
I'm so glad you said that. You have no idea how appropriate that is in the context in which people are going to hear this, which is really a study in part of strategic philanthropy versus heart-driven philanthropy in communities. So I think it's very meaningful, and I'd love to hear you. I'm so glad you had a chance to say that.
My concluding thoughts would really be, 2 things. One, of all the resources we've talked about, our most valuable, every one of us, is our time. And, I believe that if we're giving our most valuable resource, what we get back needs to be greater than what we're giving. And there's risk involved, right? When you're building a relationship, when you're venturing into the unknown, you have to make a choice to take some risk that, the ROI that is going to happen over here when you're sitting at your desk, answering emails is different. And so part of it is being willing to make that choice, to give some of your time to try these things out. And then the last thing I would say is just, I think we get so caught up in the snare, what I call the snare of preparation, that we think everything needs to, with Jeffersonian dinners, with just, trying all of the tools and techniques in the book. We wait too long. We wait too long, by the way, to invite people to give as well. I think people develop their commitment in the act of giving. And so I just really encourage people to not feel like you have to have all the resources up front and get going. Get going and build them as you go, and you'll be surprised at how quickly that will all happen.
Thank you so much, both of you, for your time today and for the book and for all the things you shared with us, both in the book and today.
Thank you, Phil.